Hello everyone and welcome to this PICO Developer tutorial. In this video, we're going to show you how to expand the capabilities of your VR application by integrating PICO controller input support. We'll show you how to map PICO controller buttons to actions and how to render virtual 3D models of PICO 4 controller into your application. So, whether you're a beginner looking to get started or an experienced developer trying to add support for PICO controllers in your application, this tutorial is for you. PICO 4 controllers offer a fantastic range of features and functionalities, and getting them set up correctly is crucial for an immersive VR experience. In this tutorial, we'll take you step by step through the process of setting up the basic mechanics to spawn virtual PICO 4 controllers that follow the player movements. We'll show you how to define input bindings so that the Unreal VR template scene works with PICO controllers using Unreal Engine 4.27, and we'll do the same for Unreal Engine 5.1 by showing you how the new enhanced input system works. So grab your PICO headset, fire up Unreal Engine, and get ready to embark on an exciting journey of setting up controller input for PICO headsets. In the previous video, we learned how to set up our development environment in Unreal Engine to be able to package and run apps on PICO headsets. However, you probably noticed that after running the app, you were holding the physical PICO controllers, but nothing was showing up to represent their location and rotation. So let's go ahead and make some changes to the VR pawn to make that possible. Unreal Engine uses motion controller components to represent devices that can have the real-world locations and rotations tracked and recreated in VR. So in order to have a virtual controller that mimics the movement of the physical controller, all we need to do is define a component that will contain a mesh and that will follow the transform of the parent motion controller component. So go ahead and add a skeletal mesh component under motion controller left and rename it to something like controller mesh left. Now do the same for the motion controller right with the controller mesh right skeletal mesh component. Assign as a skeletal mesh the PICO 4 controller, which can be found under the PICO XR plugin and specifically under PICO XR/meshes. You will find two different models, one for PICO 4 left controller and one for PICO 4 right controller. You also need to apply a small rotation offset to the skeletal meshes of the controllers to make sure that they are fully aligned with their physical counterparts. So you need to change the rotation for each of those components to be 0,0,90. This way they will be fully aligned. That's it. Save and compile your VR pawn and go ahead and create an APK file and test it on your PICO headset. Success! Here we go. As you can see, as I move the PICO controllers around, I can now see their virtual twin counterpart doing the same in VR. So we managed to get the skeletal meshes of the PICO 4 controllers showing up in our scene. If you are working on Unreal Engine 5.1, you will notice that the VR template scene is slightly different, since the VR pawn has assigned virtual hand skeletal meshes instead of controllers under the motion controller component. You can go ahead and remove them for now or disable them. Then follow the same instructions as the one we shared for Unreal Engine 4.27 to achieve the same results. Okay, so now we have virtual controllers, but we still can't perform any action. For example, teleport around or pick up items, which is normally something that is possible within the VR template scene. For that, we need to make some changes to add input mappings to our game so that it works with PICO 4 controllers. Here is a picture showing the keys and axes supported by the PICO 4 controllers. Inputs that have a continuous range, also called axes, are illustrated with bold text and may have float values in ranges from 0 to 1, like the trigger and grip buttons, or from -1 to 1, like the thumbstick X and Y input. Firstly, we'll start with Unreal Engine 4.27 that uses the default input action and axis mapping system. This system gives you the ability to map multiple keys to the same action or behavior with a single binding. Go ahead and open the Unreal Editor and then go to Project Settings, Input. Here you will see the list of existing mappings and you can even create new ones. Notice that the VR template scene already has added some input for third-party VR controllers. But the PICO XR plugin we have installed has also added some sample input by default to your project settings. This is mainly for when starting a new empty project that doesn't have any input mappings at all and aims to make things easier for you so you can quickly create actions for your VR application. However, since we're using Unreal's VR template, we don't need these sample inputs, so I'll walk you through how to remove them. Go to Project Settings, Editor, PICO XR Settings, and check the box called Show PICO XR Input Toolbar button. Once you do that, at the top of your toolbar in the Unreal Editor, you'll see a PICO XR button showing up. The last two options, add sample inputs and clear sample inputs, allow you to modify the project settings input. If you hit clear sample inputs and go back to project settings input, you will notice that now we only have the VR template input settings left, and all the sample input added by the PICO XR plugin are removed. As you may notice, the VR template has support for third-party VR controllers, but it doesn't support PICO 4 controllers, and this explains why nothing happens when you press the controller buttons in the VR template scene when you run the application on the PICO 4 headset. Here is a slide showing the mapping between the VR template actions and the PICO 4 controller input. So these are the input mappings we need to add to our project settings to make the VR template support PICO 4 controllers. So let's go ahead and, based on the slide that I shared, add all the input mapping. All the PICO controller input mappings are under the category PICO Touch. That's it. Now you can see that all the input mappings work, so we can teleport around, snap turn, or even grab and pick up the guns and fire bullets as well with them. That's all you had to do in order to integrate PICO controller input support to the VR template scene in Unreal Engine, and you can go ahead and even add more interactions if you want. For those of you using Unreal Engine 5, there is a new input system called Enhanced Input. That's the new recommended standard and is enabled by default. The old input system is deprecated. One of the biggest differences between Enhanced Input and the old input system is that each action is defined as an input action data asset, and the mapping between actions and buttons is done within input mapping context data assets that can be enabled and disabled at will. We won't describe in detail how the system works, but check the links in the description to learn more about it. I will show you how to modify Enhanced Input in your project to make it compatible with PICO controller input. The main thing you need to do is go to Content VR Template Input and then modify the different input mapping contexts so that we can add controller input support for PICO controllers. In this image, you can see exactly what changes are required. Let's start by opening up the IMC_default input asset and setting up the input mappings for PICO controllers. The only thing we need to do is to add the equivalent PICO 4 controller input. Go ahead and do the same for IMC weapon left and IMC weapon right. This action is activated whenever we grab the weapons in the scene so we can shoot spheres out of them. Finally, let's open IMC_menu and add the proper input for menu interact left and menu interact right. The two remaining input actions, menu cursor left and menu cursor right, are actions that control a pointer in the UI menu that can be spawned to exit or restart a level. This type of input requires a 2D axis input, but the PICO XR plugin doesn't currently support it. So the only way to do that is by using 1D axis input for thumbstick. So let's go ahead and make a small modification to this context to make this work with PICO controllers. We'll go ahead and create 4 new input action data assets. Make sure that the value type of each new input action is set to 1D axis. We'll need 2 for each thumbstick, and each one is going to represent the X direction and the Y direction. After creating those 4 new input actions, we can modify the input mapping context menu and add them to the mappings list. We can also connect the PICO controller input that is supported. After creating those 4 new actions, we're ready to go ahead and modify the menu blueprint to add them in. So open the menu blueprint, and the first thing I want you to do is create a new function and call it getValueOfAbsoluteBiggest. This is a really simple function. The only thing it's doing is it's taking 2 float input values and returns only one of them, specifically the one that has the highest absolute value. I'll show you in a bit why we need that. Go back to the event graph, and then at the bottom right, this is where the logic is for the cursor movement. You can see here that get menu cursor right and menu cursor left are the old 2D axis inputs. We don't want to remove them completely. Instead, we want to make sure that if you're using other headsets, it still works. So what we're going to do is, first of all, search for the new input actions we created. So get menu cursor right X, get menu cursor right Y, and then do the same for the left one. Get menu cursor left X, and get menu cursor left Y. So what we can do now really easily is, as you can see here, just the return value X of the 2D axis is exactly the same as the one coming from the PICO controller. So the only thing we want to do is use the function we created, connect it to here, and then remember where the output was going and connect that to the output of the new function we created. That's it. Now the only thing we need to do is do exactly the same for all the other values. So here we can connect this directly, and exactly the same with the rest as well. So menu cursor left X will be compared against menu cursor left X of the 2D axis, and the output is going here, and exactly the same for the Y as well. And it's connected to the right output. And that's it mainly. So what this is doing is actually it's comparing which value has the highest absolute value, and only then it's going to continue to move the cursor. This means that this project will work not only with PICO headsets but also with other controllers as well. Well done! You've successfully set up controller input for your PICO controllers, and now you can use the VR template actions to teleport around, snap turn, pick up weapons and shoot, or interact with the virtual UI menu. In this video we covered the process of setting up input for both Unreal Engine 4 and Unreal Engine 5, and I hope you learned the difference between the old input system and the enhanced input system. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more exciting VR content. If you have any questions or need further assistance, feel free to leave a comment below or check the links in the description. Thank you for watching and happy VR development!